Okay, welcome everyone. This is our August edition of the PIPMG webinar series. Thank you for joining. And as a first request, I wonder if you'll type into the chat where you're calling in from. And under today's circumstances, feel free to put in if you're looking for work or looking to hire someone. Let's keep the community connected here. So please put that in the chat where you're from, and if you're interested in being hired or hiring, let everyone know. Couple logistics about today. This will be recorded, and the recording will be hosted up on our PIPMG website under the events tab. The slides will also be available in PDF format, and those should be posted within a few days after the webinar. So no need to take notes, no need to take screenshots. It'll all be available to you. Throughout the session, we have the chat feature in Zoom, and feel free to post any questions there. If there are burning questions that we want to address during the presentation, we'll introduce those during the presentation. Otherwise, Q&A at the end. I want to show first a slide that highlights the activities that we have coming up through the rest of the year. You'll see we started off the year in February with a kickoff. This was lining up all the activities that we were going to do in 2023. We had Tom Heaps Nelson from Neurocrin present a variety of maturity curves for portfolio optimization. That's a great session, and all of these are posted to the website. We then had Claudia Campbell, who I think has joined us today. She had a great presentation about the application of project management to device development and how agile project management is being applied to devices. A lot of things we can learn there on the drug development side as well. Then our own John Fox presented the interface of project and alliance management. Great session there. We had our conference in May, and there are some outputs from that conference posted to the website. Then Karen, this is via APM, Karen presented on what's the impact that you want to have on the world, and that's focused on thinking beyond dollars about what we want to do as drug developers. Then also in June, another session, Jordan Latainer presented about the circumstances where a CRO switched to a sponsor and developing a PMO in that type of situation. Today we have Paul Cook and Mari and Joyce joining us, and they'll be talking about the diversity of project management approaches in a small biopharma company. And later this year, Karen is also presenting about building a plane while you're flying it. Always, a common situation we're in. We also have another conference at the end of the year that's still under planning, so keep an eye out for that. And we have a few other opportunities. The one in October is still TBD, and we have an opening in December. So stay on the lookout, and if you have any suggestions or you want to present something, please reach out to me or John, and we'll get you connected in. So I will stop sharing, and I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. Paul Cook, I've known Paul for several years. At a conference in the Midwest, Paul hosted us and had a great session there. So I know he's a great speaker, a great thinker in this space. Paul is the R&D project manager. He's representing the R&D project management at Generation Bio. And we also have Joyce, who is the head of the department and represents alliance management. And we have Mari, who is representing CMC project management. So diverse functions and diverse perspectives that we'll get to understand today. And with that, Paul, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Let's see here. I'm about to join the meeting as I'm sharing. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody. Just as a friendly reminder, please remain on mute unless you want to ask a question. And I believe that the protocol here is to ask through the chat. So we'll I think Joe will keep an eye on that for us. But there will be opportunities for you as participants to chime in as we go forward. No meeting would be complete without an agenda. So we'll do brief introductions, talk about who's Generation Bio, who is a company. We'll want to set the context because the project management we're talking about has a lot to the context in which we're operating. It plays a critical role in how we approach project management applications. And we'll talk then in more detail about the 3 areas of PM support that we are providing. Then speak to some of the challenges, and that'll be a point where people can chime in as well with questions, and hopefully we'll be able to provide some answers. Of course, we have a disclaimer. These views are our own and not necessarily a representation of Generation Bio. We are not going to discuss our technology or our products. If you're interested in learning more about that, you are welcome to visit our website. It's generationbio.com. This is really focused to project management and the application of project management in these parts of the company. So you heard a little bit about us as speakers. As Joe said, I'm Paul Cook. I'm a senior director in the program and alliance management group. I come from academic background, academic research, and then spent a significant portion of my business career in consulting in program and project management, and joined Generation Bio a little over 2.5 years ago. Joyce?
Yeah, so thanks, Paul. So I've been with Generation Bio for about 4 years, coming up on 4 years, and I do head up the Program and Alliance Management Department. So I have spent probably the last 20 years in some form of program, portfolio, project management across biotechnology, biopharmaceutical space, largely in the greater Boston area. And at Generation Bio, I wear a number of hats. But as Joe mentioned, what I'll focus on, and primarily in my comments, is speaking in terms of how alliance management and project management mesh, especially in a small biotech company.
Mari?
Yeah, so I'm Mari Gabramascal. My main focus is with the CMC group. I've been at Generation Bio for about 5 years now. My background is in science, bioengineering, and I've just shifted over to project management for about a year now.
Great, thank you. And you can find us on LinkedIn if you want to reach out with additional questions. Always welcome to engage in conversation. So, Joyce, you want to tell the participants a little bit about our great company?
Yeah. So I'll spend a couple of minutes just giving you a very high-level thumbnail sketch of who Generation Bio is as a company. So we are a smallish biotech company. I know that when I say that we're small, it depends on what your experience is about what you think is small, but we're located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And we currently have a workforce of about 200 people. So just to give you a sense of how many people we have on this mission with us. We were founded in 2017. So Mari is one of our longstanding employees, has been with us from not quite the beginning, but very much early on, which is great to have that perspective. And our mission really is to open up a new frontier of genetic medicines. And what we want to be able to do is to have genetic medicines that can be really delivered in very early in a human life, really in infancy. And what we imagine the future will be for that is that will create a life along these patients who have genetic conditions will live long lives, and over time will wind up being largely, unaffected by their genetic conditions, and they'll live their lives as though that was just something that they periodically need to treat, and it really does not affect their day-to-day lives. Those questions you see under Imagine a World Without Genetic Disease is kind of one of the places that we think about in terms of our touchstone about like what could that mean as we build this world that we have a vision about. What would it mean for those patients and their families and loved ones, right? So what do you see as you think about a future where genetic conditions are treated very early on in a patient's lives and largely do not impact their day-to-day existence? The infographic on the bottom right of this slide really gives you a very high-level view of the platform technologies that we're bringing to bear and our proprietary approach to that. So really, if we think about like to build that world, we have to deliver, the correction there, and that construct with SEDNA close-ended DNA is really one of our components of our proprietary platform that we're building. And then we're also thinking, how do we deliver that, right? So we are also building expertise in cell-targeted LNPs. I think probably many of us, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, may not have known what LNP stood for. Many of us probably do know what LNP stands for now. So, but that's also another element. And then once we put those two things together, how do we, manufacture that in a way that is scalable and cost effective so that we can really help patients globally, which ultimately is part of our vision. And just to put this in context about where we see ourselves, as we think about the evolution of therapeutics, I think we've all probably been well versed in the small molecules and the role that plays in our lives. So for some of us on a day-to-day basis, and then the emergence of biologics as we went through the really coming into play, particularly in the latter chapters of the 20th century. And again, many of us probably have a personal experience with RNA therapeutics more recently. But where we see ourselves is really taking some of the early promising activities on viral delivery of genetic medicine and going into a non-viral approach and being able to deliver it non-viral. And so there are some real elements of that we're really focused on. And that's and really being able to build a platform that sort of creates this next wave of genetic medicines is where we want to play. And it's certainly a lofty goal, but we're all in it together here at Generation Bio. So I want to hand it back over to Paul to maybe talk a little bit about kind of who we are and where we are on this journey.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. As Joyce alluded to, right, we are not just building a new product, we're actually building a new modality. And so there's a lot that needs to happen in the research and development space. When you think about the path towards patients, the first part is really that startup, right, where we get in and do the research at the very early phase. And then as we see success with the application, then growing that platform into programs that will eventually lead us to the clinical programs and the treating the patients across a wide portfolio of therapeutic areas. We are down in that lower left-hand quadrant going from the startup platform development into the growth and platform to program phase. That's an important context to understand because the research is in-house. We have our own labs and we do all of our own development, research and investigation. And so there's a lot of coordination that goes on and a lot of scientific inquiry that goes on, which is part of the context of how we apply project management. Ultimately, to get up to the point where we can be in patients, right, we need to be able to really drive that process. And we're a company that's really also focused on culture and hiring people who believe in the vision, but also adhere to the various aspects that we believe are important for building a great organization. And from that, we also draw an interest in improving operational effectiveness. So as we grow, we need to continue to grow both from the operational perspective, but also continue to grow our research perspective. So these components play an important role in how we show up for work. We'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But the components that the three of us provide support around, I in research and development, Mari in CMC, and Joyce in alliance management, have different demands and different stakeholders that we need to address. So that sort of brings us to the three areas benefiting from that support. So that research and development phase, I'll talk about. Mari will talk about CMC, and then Joyce will talk about strategic alliances. So this is really our roles and responsibilities that we take on in these particular areas. So in research and development, my role is I partner with the Chief Scientific Officer, Operation Officer, and Development Officer, and work at the strategic level, translating company strategic priorities into objectives that the scientific teams then take and execute on. And that requires the ability to direct organizational support around those teams that are creating those research strategies, the functions that support that, because it is highly cross-functional activity, including molecular biology and chemistry, manufacturing control, cell biology, a lot of input from various people with very deep expertise. That requires a bit of effort on looking at that strategy and making sure that it's properly resourced and properly addressed. So there is some tactical project management support for the scientific teams coming in when there's a need to take meeting minutes or even drive agendas, working with people who are really focused on deep subject matter expertise and may not be so inclined to be PMs. And that's one of the challenges, right? We're working with people who have that very deep knowledge. And I came from a background of neuroscience, and I was the lab bench person, and I really didn't like schedules, and I didn't like scope or objectives, and I did have to write research grants, so that helped. But as a PM, I understand that disposition and work to help bring people along and understanding why is there value in this? And we demonstrate that value in that PM practice. So in that research development area, I'm working both at the top level, strategic level, but also working down through the various levels directly with scientists as well and leaders in those areas to pull them along with some of those value adds that project management can provide. As I say, project management does all the stuff that you don't want to have to do, and they're happy to give it to us. So I'll turn it over to Mari to talk about CMC.
Yeah, so from R&D, the main focus is how to expand our technology and build it out. So with me, in terms of CMC, I interface with the CMC team mainly, and try to keep the objectives aligned with the business needs. But I also, with that, I provide product management support to the CMC key stakeholders, as well as design and implement various tools and practices like Scrum, MS Project, etc., as well as different tools in terms of inventory systems to help support the team, but which ones that actually fit best to the team. With that, we're managing various stakeholders. So those that are researchers have academic experience, but also engineers that have industry experience. So their needs might be different. So in terms of identifying tools and practices, we just have to meet in the middle in terms of, and find out which tools work best for the team and fits with the team specifically. So yeah, that's CMC in general.
Great. And Joyce, you want to speak to Alliance?
Sure. So we are, as in part of being a small biotech company, we're not at this point in our life cycle have a lot of different alliances that are in place or collaborations in place. But we did earlier this year announce a strategic alliance with Moderna. And so, this is an example of it is our first strategic alliance as a company. And so there is a lot of desire to really make sure that we are getting off on the right foot and really also kind of allowing ourselves internally to learn the ropes on this as an organization. So, one of the roles, and so this is sort of this interweaving between some alliance management elements, but also bringing PMs, approaches into that realm. And certainly, I'm one of the people who is a key communication conduit with external alliance partners, right? So I have a colleague on the other side that, maintaining that open line of communication, understanding if there's any sensitivities. That's certainly one element. And because we are a small company, I have a very rapid ability to take that information and talk about it internally and make sure that we're adapting and approaching things appropriately to keep things productive and efficient. As with most alliances, there are joint meetings that are set up, and there's a fair amount of planning and activity around making sure that we have the structure, the approach, alignment, both internally but also across the board with our colleagues on the other side. And there's a lot of project management skill that goes, activities that go into that to make sure that we're really meeting the needs so that our people are putting together the right materials, but we're also aligned with in terms of timing. So lots of activities there. And certainly from an internal perspective, being a thought partner with the project lead, staying close about what he, or in this case it's a he, He is hearing, understanding how our internal scientific activities are supporting the work plan that we've put in place, but also making sure that we're in touch with other key stakeholders. So if we're identifying something, making sure that we deploy rapidly into our organization, have the right conversations, and making sure that we're constantly course adjusting. And certainly, again, being a small company, we don't have a huge team of people where we can dedicate somebody. So I'm more than happy on an as-needed basis is to really dive in and do that tactical day-to-day project management support. You know, to Paul's point, sometimes it's taking meeting minutes if I'm sitting in a meeting and just, you know, making sure that I'm supporting the project lead and the project team in that way. Other times it's making sure that we've got the right, you know, making sure that the Gantt chart that we're sharing is appropriate. So it runs the gamut, again, from being pretty strategic in terms of the thinking, and also external facing in this case, and also really getting into the day-to-day with our internal teams in particular.
Thanks, Joyce. We're going to, in the next slides that we'll talk about some of the challenges in general in the company, and it's meant to be a conversation between the three of us and also you as the audience. But I just want to pause here and ask, are there any specific questions about these three areas that people might have before we move forward? If not, I'm sure there are questions, but maybe people are shy. That's okay. So let's talk a little bit about challenges in a small early stage company. So we always think about things that, you know, are tough and that pose as challenges. There's a question actually.
Oh,
Does our CMC PM report to our Project
sure.
Management Alliance?
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, so in our current model, our CMC PMs report into the PM function. So Mari is part of my group specifically. And Mari, please, I'll leave it to you. I mean, we have the benefit, and maybe this is a you know, sort of a foreshadowing. The benefit is that we are small enough where we have very high level, high touch communication between the function, in terms of this case CMC, but also the project, and Mari embeds quite deeply in CMC. So Mari, I don't know if you want to just elaborate a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was kind of helpful moving from scientist into the CMC PM role because I've been with the group for about 5 years now. So meeting with various stakeholders there, it's been easy. So with the project sponsors as well, but it's been easy in terms of touch points with that, and driving some of that communication out to Joyce in terms of where we are as a whole in terms of our programs and stuff. So yeah.
I know there's frequently a trend in industry to have project managers dedicated to a particular function. So we'll have regulatory PMs, CMC PMs. They aren't necessarily integrated across the PMO. We're small enough that we like that integration, and we meet as a group to think about the practices that we want to establish as a PM organization, and we learn from each other in the constantly changing environment of tools. And how we can continue to improve delivery of communication, for example, to our teams. So that having that single PM, PM group that integrates across the various areas has been very beneficial to us. So challenges in a small company. We also like to think when we are faced with a challenge, it's also an opportunity to learn. Maybe the question that came up about coordination across the PMs. I think if it was.
Do you have PM that coordinates between functional PMs?
So we don't really have functional isolated PMs. We do have areas of focus. And when we talk about practices, we'll get together and talk about individual practices within our teams to see what we might be able to do to improve or help them out. But currently we don't have specific functional PMs. Yep. Appreciate the questions. Thank you. So this is a point where we sort of have a conversation, talking about the challenges and those opportunities to learn. And of course, 80% or more of what we do as project management is about communication. It can be quite a challenge in a small company that's growing. We've moved from the idea where a company where everybody knows your name, right? We can all sit together at the bar and talk and have one conversation, everybody hears it, to we have one meeting called town halls on Fridays, but everybody's having separate meetings. And so we're breaking into subgroups. And part of that PM effort is to understand, okay, this group is talking about this and this group is talking about that. And we want to make sure that they get connected together if they need to. And that piece can be a real challenge, right? Because you need to be listening to multiple conversations and have threads from the CMC team that's working on a particular problem and the molecular biology team that's working on a complementary problem, and making sure that they're talking and that we understand how that influences the work that we're doing. Other examples of communication challenges.
I mean, I think, you know, the other piece of it is just, you know, from a technology perspective, right? So you think about the face-to-face communication that happens and just constantly being aware of, like, if we're small enough where, to your point, like somebody could run into people and have a chat in the cafeteria, but then how much of that needs to then be put into something that's more of a, I'll call it a formal, but more of a channel that's sort of IT enabled, so that we make sure that the right people see it. And I think that's another thing that we are constantly kind of understanding about, like, how is the communication happening on this specific topic, and does it need to be elevated to say, like, let's make sure that this goes into that channel, that forum, so that conduit, so that the, you know, the broader people, the broader set of stakeholders are hearing it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to talk specifically on the communication part, starting from, you know, being number 25 in the company to now being X amount at a significant amount. The communication style has definitely changed, but it's been a challenge to what Joyce and Paul has been saying, but we're trying to figure out the style that works best for us. You know, right now, these town halls can be a space where the whole company can meet together and discuss out and push out information that needs to be pushed out to the whole company. But we're starting to utilize programs and softwares like MS Teams and such to, you know, push out information and pull in information as well. So trying to figure out that middle point as we're going through this transitionary space as well.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect is that, you know, and I'm sure many of you are working on where the science is very complex and very multifaceted. And I think also as we grow is to make sure that we are constantly cognizant around, listen, if we have a very deep scientific hypothesis or a finding or something, and we want to share it with our broad internal set of stakeholders, like, how do we make sure that we make that accessible? And again, that's something where there's a lot of folks who are part of that solution, both the scientific staff, our communications teams, but we also have a role to play in just sort of being one of those folks as a sounding board to make sure that we're constantly communicating effectively, but also as we grow, there's a lot of different folks across the board that are curious about what we're up to scientifically, but we can't assume that they have a PhD level understanding of all of the details.
Yeah, that sort of speaks to some of the opportunities around the communication, right? It's learning lines of communication, as Joyce spoke of, but also what is the receiver hearing and what sort of information do they really need to know? Sometimes there's a passive element where we say information is there, you can find it, that's good, but the amount of information that's available now in the organization is tremendous, especially around data as research is progressing and there's data that's being generated. It does need to be curated and it does need to be focused. So we're looking for forums, and we have forums where we're able to stop and say, this is a piece of data that we really want to share and understand and analyze and interpret. And so we have that type of forum, but there's also the ability to have MS Teams space, able to have private chats where maybe you need to have a smaller group conversation about something that may be more sensitive or may be uncertain or really only require a few eyes on the idea. And that makes it easier to have 4 or 5 people talking rather than having 20 people right in the room where you're trying to get an agreement. So another part of being a small company with that growth trajectory is the constant dynamic changing environment. I can think of lots of examples of that changing environment, ranging from adding people that are not familiar with the history of the company, not familiar with the history of how we operate, or maybe they're coming from a very different background. We bring a lot of people in from academic settings into the business world. It's their first real job right out of college, or maybe out of graduate school or postdoc, and they're accustomed to working in a particular way. And so there's that changing piece. We're also growing, so we're having to add a lot of process, and the term process can be difficult for some people to accept, but we need to have those processes for quality, we need to have those processes for regulatory, we need to have those processes for manufacturing. So establishing those changes and both the systems, but also the behaviors, that puts a lot of pressure on people as well. So it's communicating and understanding, how do we help them balance the workload, stopping and saying, right now, this is what we need to work on. And somebody's got their head down at the bench, they need to pull up, and they really haven't had time to digest all the pieces that are in front of them. We as program and project managers can stop and say, hey, the immediate concern is this, we'll get to that later. And they go, great, and they can go work on it. So that coordination in that dynamic changing environment can be very beneficial from a project management, because we're sort of elevated above it. We don't have to be too deep into the scientific weeds.
Yeah, I think for me specifically, I think with that, since it's a small company, we don't have a change management protocol or process as of yet. But the more we identify what the needs are and what the process may look like, we can start identifying what that change protocol and process could look like in our space specifically.
Yeah, sort of speaks to what we do, right, in being able to be resilient and adaptable.
Yeah.
As we work through on a daily basis or weekly or quarterly basis, we see that we're going to have to change an approach. So if I'm stuck in having to run things in a particular way, that's not resilient or adaptable, and that can really prevent progress, right? When we see that there needs to be a change, maybe it's a focused area, or maybe it's a particular way of doing something. I'm beholden to saying we have to have a particular set of Gantt charts, and that would be applied to a more mature product, more mature organization. That isn't necessarily appropriate. There are other ways to approach that effort besides a deep Gantt chart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we'll touch on this as we get closer to the close, but I think it also, that resiliency and adaptability, and one of the roles I think the three of us all hold, is like, how do we show up in that context as being leaders of the organization? Because we are often put in situations where we're asked to have a leadership style voice with our teams and things. And so I think that resiliency and adaptability, and helping to sort of bring people through some of those changes, some are very easy and they're very obvious, and other of them can be fairly challenging. So I think that's another element that I think we'll come back and touch on briefly.
Yeah. One of the questions was the philosophy sounds like a lean startup philosophy, and wondering if there's an explicit management framework that we use. I think one of the advantages is that we have leadership that's been in the industry for quite a while and has seen a lot of things that don't work.
Yeah.
And so we really wanted to establish the company in a different way. One, it's meant to last. It's built to last. And for those of you that are familiar with the Jim Collins' book, really it has lean startup sentiment. But it is sort of a culture of its own.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's also a question about, at your size, how formal is senior governance? So I would say that it's still, it exists, but it is not highly formal. So I think, as Maury said, like, we don't have a formal change management process that's in place for everything. But there are certainly places where we do need to make sure that we are being more formal. And so those are the elements where to say, like, let's make sure that we acknowledge that those places exist. We're ready to adapt to those. But there are places where we want to, we're not we're not gonna put a framework in place or a hierarchy in place just for the sake of a process. It's more to say like, how do we put the formality where it's appropriate and needed, and where is it that we can be, allow things to flow a little bit more. So I don't know if either one of you would want to comment as well on that.
That's good. Yeah, and again, thank you for the questions.
Yeah,
They're
and
very
I
insightful.
get, and the only other thing is, I think that there's certainly also an acknowledgement, I mean, that, as we progress, and that the slide that Paul showed earlier, I think, is indicative of that. It's like, as we move deeper and we get into sort of full development, we will absolutely have to have more formal governance. So I think there's no question in people's mind that, that day will come. But let's make sure that we're not being overly prescriptive too early. So I think, trying to strike that right balance is where we are in our growth trajectory.
Yeah, so one of the other challenges is a variety of stakeholders that Mari alluded to earlier. Mari, if you wanted to speak to that, I think we all have.
Yeah, I mean, I work with a variety of stakeholders, from academic experience to engineers to those that have been in industry for a very long time. So their needs might be different in terms of how they want to receive information or how they want the process to go. So identifying, your stakeholders, but not only monitoring them, but trying to prioritize their needs as well, but to the point where everybody is in the middle is difficult, but as a challenge. But there's ways to it. In terms of also communication, how they want to receive information. So yeah, there can be challenges. It could also be challenges in terms of the tools that they might want to use as scientists. Some of them might not want to use specific tools like MS Project to track their work. So I've shifted that team to move into a more agile Scrum board method, so that team members can start visualizing some of that work, and start looking through in terms of what needs to be done, what needs to be pushed forward. So that's been helpful as well. But yeah, there's a lot of challenges with that in terms of being in a small company as well. So
Yeah, there's a dynamic tension that exists, right? Because the perspective from the various stakeholders, they have their perspective, right? And we understand why they do. They don't always line up perfectly, and that dynamic tension has to be managed, but it's a really important one, because in one instance, especially in research, you don't always know what the answer is going to be. You can anticipate what the possible answers are, and that will direct your research, but you don't know when the answer will actually come. And so there's a push to make those things happen. On the other side, there are a lot of things that have to happen that have long lead times. And so we need to understand that we're working with some constraints. And so the stakeholders that are concerned about those constraints, and the stakeholders that are concerned about being able to do the right thing, we need to balance that. And program management's there, right? We're looking at those two ends saying, okay, how do I manage the expectations of those teams? So that's, communicating to those stakeholders becomes really critical. And people, I think, speaks to us as an organization. People listen, right? People want to understand, and not everybody has the answers, but as a group, we can come up with some really good solutions.
I think one of the places that PM can really play a role in some of that sort of natural tension is, I use the term honest broker, right? So there are places where we can help to step in and really facilitate those different points of view and find a path forward. And I think we're lucky enough at Generation Bio specifically to work at a place where people are curious, they're open-minded, they know that the path we're trying to forge is difficult, and so there's a real willingness to work together. So it makes our lives a little bit easier in that respect, because I know that I've worked at places where that is not always as true, but it's really allowing, we can be part of helping all of these folks find the way forward.
There we go. Yeah, so part of that is that understanding the context of the receiver, right? It's learn about somebody, begin to understand their perspective. If you're beholden to one point of view as a program manager, that can be a bit of a challenge because there are multiple points of view in many of the situations. And we are certainly around the process saying, I think this is the best practice in that process, but the actual decisions around how we'll move forward, that's really up to the team to make. So it's there, even internally inside ourselves, inside myself, there's that dynamic of, it's time for me to step back. It's time for me to push forward. It's time for me to say, let's stop and think about this, or let's wrap up the conversation, right? So research advancing into development, it's a big change and challenge. There's, as I mentioned, this dynamic tension between that research side and that development side. Development is a little bit more defined, and getting to those milestones, right, can be time consuming and a lot of sweat equity. So that part of that is bringing along those research teams to understand, this is where we're headed. And so we sort of need to guide you in this direction. And sometimes there's a really interesting scientific idea that might pop up. And it's like, yeah, that would be great if we were in an academic lab, but it's not really going to drive us towards that development milestone. And so we decide whether or not we're going to pursue that or not. But there is a difference in the industry, right? The industry needs to produce some results towards the product. The product isn't papers or theses or grants, but it is a product that's going to the patient. So that's a big change for a lot of research people coming from an academic world into this environment. I guess, Mari, how does CMC view that research to development challenge?
Yeah, there's some challenges with that, but with working with engineers, it's a bit easier, as they're trying to find the edge points as well. So it's not a major challenge. I mean, there's one that I had today where a team member was wanting to push forward with a certain process that to them was important, but to the whole team didn't find that much gain as a whole. So trying to get that in play, but understand what the priorities are, that can be a little bit difficult sometimes. But again, that's also with the variety of stakeholders, that's a challenge in itself. So
yeah, so those opportunities for learning, having come from an academic research world, I can understand the focus, and I will step into the science and listen because I'm curious, but keeping in mind that, yeah, we have this goal that we really need to reach, and it is a product goal for the company and for the patients, and people get behind that. There's just a natural inclination to be curious. We want people to be curious because that's where a lot of interesting solutions can come from when you're trying to solve a problem. So one of the other challenges is the definition of PM. Perspective of PM, and what value it brings and what it's good for varies significantly in a small company. A lot of people have not seen mature PM or full PM, and so in some instances it's viewed as being highly administrative. In a lot of research groups, it's perceived as non-essential, right? We don't need anybody, not in this environment, but in a different company. Someone said, I don't need a project manager to tell me what to do. It's like, that definitely, you don't want me telling you what to do because you're a scientist, you're an expert. But coordinating all the effort across that, and that really is one of the biggest challenges I think that we face as a project management group is how do we provide value, demonstrate that value, and through that demonstration, pull people along into saying, yeah, actually, I want more of that. Mari, do you hear, you've had some experience, right, in a variety of PM situations. In engineering, it is a little different, but do you have examples?
yeah, I mean, I think with engineers, they really do see the value in PMs because they see structure, they see getting from point A to point B, getting that product out, and how to do it in the most efficient way. So they see that value. It may be difficult sometimes with with the variety of stakeholders and their needs and wants could be difficult in that space. But yeah, I think there's many roles and many hats that PMs can play, especially in CMC, especially also if you have experience in the science. But again, I'm not the expert, they're the expert. I'm there to listen, but also identify how can we get from point A to point B in the most efficient way.
Yeah, and I think I think part of it is to not come in with a preconceived notion as a PM about like, this is the way that we will do it. This is the tool that we will use, but you can have a point of view, but really come in with a point of view and match with curiosity, right? So, I mean, Mari, you had mentioned earlier that, working even with engineers around like, listen, this tool is really not working for us. We could do it, but we would like to use something different. And so the adaptability around, okay, well, let's figure out like, there's a different way we can do this. There's a different, like, let's bring forward some different tools to help support an agile process. And that flexibility, as opposed to being so single-minded about things, I think that's really important, because I think it allows you to approach parts of the organization where it is not well understood, or there is also a preconceived notion around like, it's all administrative, or it's very hierarchical, or it's very rigid. And for us to show up in a much more open and flexible way, where we're not getting run over, but we're also willing to sort of travel along the road with these groups, and find ways of helping them do their jobs more efficiently, and with less drag.
Yeah, and always remembering that, applying project management, the practice of project management to a team that's not familiar with it is a change, and it's a behavioral change. And when there's behavioral change, there's uncertainty. If they don't know where it's going, it does require a little bit of trust. So helping the team understand, this is the direction we're moving, here's how we're going to do it. We can make adjustments, but the best practice, if you want to use that term, is we really need to know what we're doing and how we're going to do it and where we're going to do it and when we're going to do it, so that we build a plan. And all good projects have those elements. The details of how those get defined and captured in the artifacts / deliverables varies tremendously. In a mature organization, you'll have very rigid definitions of what those artifacts and deliverables are. In a smaller company, it's much more flexible. And as a PM, it gives us an opportunity to be creative, and hopefully, the learning opportunity is demonstrating value, but getting rid of what isn't working. It can be tough, because you think, oh, this sort of whiteboarding exercise is so fun, but it's just not appropriate here, right? We're not gonna get the same traction that I think the team, by doing it, it's worthwhile. So you have to admit when it's not the right time to do something that maybe you have a personal passion about. So I think we're at like 9 minutes before the hour. I think ask what you'd like to know as participants here.
Yeah, there's been a couple of questions that I think have popped up on the chat. So one is thinking about it in the context of the governance question, because we've said like we don't have across the board very like highly formal governance. How do we manage spend? Do people in research just start mini projects all the time? How is that managed? So I think this would be very challenging in a small company, which I think it is challenging. I think I'm very open to your perspectives. My perspective is that we are small enough also that we have our finance colleagues who are traveling along our journey with us. And so they understand how as we ebb and flow, how that impacts us from a finance perspective. And I think I also think that at this point in our growth trajectory, we don't necessarily always try to budget at such a fine level of detail, right? So there's a little bit of ways about how we, forecast costs that allow us to have some level of flexibility as things move forward. But Mari and Paul, if there's other perspectives that you have.
So just commenting on the little projects that someone starts, we actually want that to happen. We want, some people say, well, these are skunk works. especially in research, we want people to think about, hey, I've got an interesting idea. Maybe the system would benefit if we tried this, or maybe this is a problem that we need to solve. Let me just run an experiment, because they can go into the lab and run an experiment and see if it works. And we don't want to choke that through a heavy-handed governance. That has to be approved for you to do. So we say there's a 20% of our effort that is really innovation, right? We have this list of work that we're doing, the 80%, but you're really given 20% to go and investigate something. And so we encourage people to do that. And when they start getting some results that look positive, bring that back and say, hey, I think that we should try this approach, or we should look at that. And it comes to the larger scientific organization where people can evaluate it and say, hey, great idea, let's do that. And we've seen instances where someone really has hunkered down and said, no, this is the right thing to do. And everybody's saying no, and runs an experiment and go, oh, yeah, maybe that is important. Let's pursue that. So if we didn't have that sort of freedom to innovate at the scientific level, we might miss those opportunities.
Yeah. There's another question about, let's see, Claudia, about PM needs to also have broad functional expertise to help out beyond the PM role. How do you view that approach? I have seen that approach work. I think our model is almost a little bit flipped, which is that we have a very small PM, like dedicated PM team, right? So we don't try to necessarily have a large heavyweight PM team. What we do is there are people in the organization who have an affinity and an interest in PM responsibilities. I mean, Mari's an example of somebody who their interest was so strong that she's like, I want to do this, and we, that's an opportunity I'm happy that we've been able to make happen. But we also have people, even just scientists, who are like, hey, I have this small group that I work with. Let me powwow with Paul. Let's think about this. And Paul can have a light touch, but that person is actually able to exercise some PM skills so that we're able to kind of mesh it that way. We don't necessarily ask currently our PMs to dive into sort of deeper functional expertise per se. But, again, I think there may be some examples where, Mari has just a great deal of knowledge. And so there are times when she may, I don't want to speak for Mari, but, striking that balance between subject matter expertise and PM, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Joyce, that exactly. I've been at the CMC team for quite a while, so going back and trying to help them with PM responsibilities, there is that balance. There are points where I do have to step in or not I do have to, but I find interest in stepping in and understanding what's going on in terms of the functional technical spaces. But there are team members in that group that are also interested in some PM roles as well. So giving them the opportunity to, take meeting minutes, run their technical meetings in a space where they can share some PM ideas, or like I said, the Scrum board tool as well. They're the ones that take the lead on that and utilize that and bring that information back to our more high level senior staff space. So it goes both ways.
Karen, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, great presentation. Really great hearing from all three of you. Thank you, Joyce, for that, and Mark. I just wanted to ask a question, because we talked a lot about the operational side of the PMO, and I just wondered, I mean, clearly you built your organisation around a platform technology, around a specific modality. But then in terms of deciding how you apply that modality, it's like, where do you start? The opportunities are endless, and obviously you're only a small company. So, and I see that strategically you're starting in liver and retina. How did you come up with that decision? Was PMO involved in those strategic decision making, or only involved in the operational side?
Yeah, it's a great question, Karen. I mean, we do have a strategy group that really spearheads that. That said, I think there's periodically there's cross-functional groups that help to evaluate different priorities in terms of the strategic deployment of the platform, and we're involved in that. But I think really, if we think about our chief strategic officer and his group, really are the nexus of where that happens, along obviously with the CEO and the C-suite generally. So So we are participants in that conversation on specific elements of it. But we do have a strategic group that really thinks that very broadly.
Okay, thanks.
I think there were two other questions. So around investors and stockholders requiring a minimum level of PM capability, I can't reflect on that for Generation Bio. I can't say previous experience that as a consultant working for another organization, we were brought in to build PM because the chief operating officer believed and had seen that banking investors feel more confident if plans are clearly created and fit with the strategic objectives of the investors. So I've seen that where that is has been a explicit value creator. That is not the situation that we have here, though. The other question about platform, I think from Joe. So the platform that we use for communication is MS Teams, sometimes email, but I think a lot of our communication is in MS Teams. We don't have an enterprise PM platform. We need to decide when we're going to do that. And it could be that as we get closer to that need for development and clinical development, that it will become more standard. I think from a research perspective, we are constantly working to get the research teams to have similar practices, and everybody does report using dashboards up to those groups that are evaluating the strategy and the objectives. So we do have some formalisms around that, but it's a very light touch. We really want people to focus on doing the work of being at the bench and solving problems, and not as much time filling out dashboard documents.
We're at noon, I don't know.
We are. Oh, my goodness. Well, you can clearly go on for quite a while. Want to thank you all for your attention.
Joe want to say maybe.
Let's see here.
Yeah, Paul, I wanted to thank you, Joyce and Mari, for joining us. Great session. A lot of great questions came up through the group, and thank you for addressing those throughout. On behalf of PIPMG, another great webinar series. And for the audience, I know there were some people who had trouble joining, so this was recorded. It will be posted in the next few days, as well as the slides, if you find the slides helpful in a PDF format. So again, thank you. And we look forward to having our next session in about a month.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Thanks,
Thank
Joe.
you for all the participants.
Thanks for having us.
For sharing your questions. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.